It's January 21st, 2015, and we are at the Silver Lake Library today to interview Dr. Clarence Berne about his life and history in Silver Lake. The interviewer is Michael Masterson, and the cameraman is Marco Larson. Thanks, Dr. Berne. We appreciate you coming in today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Can you just give us your full information about your name and where your current address is and how long you lived in Silver Lake?
Present location is in Bradbury in the valley, the San Gabriel Valley. Address is 1763 Royal Oaks Drive North, and apartment J8, and the zip code in there is 91010.
Your full name?
Thomas Van Cleve Berne, B-E-R-N-E.
Great. We wanted to interview you because you grew up in Silver Lake with your family.
Yes.
Tell us, first of all, let's start with your parents. Tell us a little about your mom and dad, how they ended up in Los Angeles and in Silver Lake.
Okay. They were both born in Iowa, and my mother was raised on a farm. My father was raised in a small town, and his father was an undertaker. They met at the University of Iowa, and they were married while they were still in Iowa City. My mother was one of the first women at University of Iowa to attain a PhD in child psychology, of all things.
What year was that?
I can't tell you exactly. It would have been in the mid-20s, but I can't.
Unusual for a woman, too.
Oh, yes. And my father went to medical school there at the University of Iowa. And at the end of his time, it was in 1931, and the Depression had hit, and there were no jobs in Iowa. He could get he had trained there as a surgeon, general surgeon, and his previous boss had left Iowa City and come to Los Angeles to be the chairman of surgery at the University of Southern California the year before he graduated. And his boss, his name was Dr. Rowan. Dr. Rowan developed bad arthritis and became so that he couldn't walk in that time. And so he offered my father a job assisting him and sort of taking over most of the responsibilities that required physical activity. And that job was at USC, which at that time was housed, the medical school was, at least the clinical part was completely housed at the Los Angeles County Hospital, now the Los Angeles County USC Medical Center. That's how my family got here.
What year did they come?
In 31, and they lived, I'm not exactly sure of the location, but somewhere west of downtown Los Angeles, and they, for a couple of years, and then then built a house here in Silver Lake in 39, I think they started it, and maybe moved in the same year, I think. The house was picked because it was close to the hospitals that he went to. One was the county hospital, of course, but he also had a private practice at the Good Samaritan and the St. Vincent's and California Hospital and Children's Hospital.
So this location was convenient, Silver Lake was.
Yeah, and as the name of the area became Pill Hill because it was so convenient to those hospitals. Many doctors lived there.
What was the address of your house?
2023 Redcliff Street.
And is that the house that you came into when you were born?
Yeah, actually, I was born. It was Kensington Street was the street where we lived when I was born. But I guess I was about 3.5, I guess, when I moved in there to 2023 Redcliff.
Okay, so you grew up in Silver Lake.
Yeah.
And tell us about your family. You have brothers and sisters, or?
I had one brother, 2.5 years older, named John, and no other siblings.
Okay. So, growing up in Silver Lake, tell us about your childhood there. Where did you go? Which schools did you go to? What kind?
I went to Ivanhoe at first. I went to kindergarten in the old brick school before they moved in. They had just built the one that's there now and is used now. But I had 1 year in kindergarten in the old school. And I went there during the time up through fifth grade, and much of that was during World War II. And at the end of World War II, when my father came back and we sort of looked at the education problems, there were not enough teachers, so they were having half-day sessions, and my parents decided that wasn't a good way to learn, and so I then started going to Flemish Preparatory School, which is in La Cañada. There was a bus that came down to Silver Lake and Los Feliz and Glendale and picked people up and took them back to La Cañada.
So is that where you completed your...
Yeah, I finished high school there and went to Pomona College and then to USC Medical School. And I then trained as an intern at the LA County USC, well, at that time it was Los Angeles County Hospital, and then stayed on there as a general surgery resident. Finished my residency in '65.
So your family has a long, long history with USC.
Oh yes, yes. And actually, I took summer school. I went to Pomona, but each summer I took classes at USC, so I could get through in 3 years instead of 4.
That's good. You mentioned your mother had a degree in psychology. Did she work?
Yes, she did for a little while in Iowa City, but never here.
Okay.
There weren't jobs.
Yeah.
She was a teaching assistant at Iowa City, but when she came here, there just were no jobs.
Yeah. So she was just a homemaker.
Homemaker, and then the war came along, and she had family to look after.
You mentioned your father came back from the war. What was he doing in the war? Where did he go? What was he doing?
He was the chief surgeon for the 73rd Evacuation Hospital, which was made up of doctors from USC, from the county hospital, who all volunteered to go to form a unit. And they went together first to Assam, which is in the far eastern part of India, up against the Himalaya mountains, and then later on they moved down into Burma. There was fighting going on in the area between the Japanese, and mostly some American troops, but mostly British and Chinese and Gurkha. Gurkhas were the headhunters of the area and were in the Indian Army. So it was an interesting time, and they were there for 2.5 years.
And when he came back, he resumed his work.
Yeah, when he came back, he was being rotated back to go, the unit was being reorganized to go to invade the mainland China. Mm-hmm. And they were getting sort of a little R&R, but they were forming up the attack on mainland China when atomic bomb was dropped. Atomic bombs were dropped and the war ended. So then he just went back into practice and also as as a member of the faculty at USC, and then by 40. Before the war, he had become the chairman of the department, so he resumed that position.
Your father has, there's sort of an interesting sort of media and historical connection with your dad because he was the inspiration for a movie.
Well, you remember Dr. Rowan, his boss, when he first came here, became crippled, and so he would take him around on trips to make rounds and to go to conferences and such, and wheel him in a wheelchair. And a county hospital is often used for pilots for hospitals, and they were making a pilot for the one with Lou Ayres back in the late 30s, Dr. Kildare movie. And they got on, it hadn't been part of the plot, but they thought that this was a great thing to add to the plot, and so they made Dr. Kildare in that movie wheel his boss around in a wheelchair.
Oh. So he was the inspiration for that
Yes,
character, actually, which then became a TV show later.
Yes.
So
yeah.
that's quite fun. Let's go back to your childhood a little bit. So you basically grew up in Silver Lake. Tell us about your early memories of Silver Lake. What was it like then? Who did you play with? Where did you hang out? What did you do?
Yes. Well, it was not nearly as heavily populated, and there were many fewer houses, many more vacant lots. We had several close neighbors who had children my age. They're right behind us were I'm trying to remember their names now. David and anyway, the Chapmans lived there, 2 boys, and then sort of catty-cornered was Robert McBurney. Both of those families were doctors were their fathers, and across the vacant lot to the south was the Salazars living in the house that belonged to one of the police chiefs of Los Angeles for a while, and had a shooting range in the downstairs, and we never got to shoot, but it's always interesting. Cheryl Salazar, I still see him. He's probably my oldest friend. Across the street were the Arants, and Dick Arant was my also my age, and his father was the music director for CBS Radio, and so we got to go to a lot of radio shows, which were interesting in those days. And then across Redcliff, on the other side of Redcliff, was John Bieber, and his father was in the paper business, manufacturing paper. So there were a lot of kids, particularly boys my age there.
Mm-hmm. Did you know any of the Hathaways?
No, I didn't ever know the Hathaways. One of the Hathaways was in the same year, but I'm not sure about classes, as my brother at Ivanhoe. And I'm pretty sure it was a daughter. It was, but anyway, that's the closest we got to the Hathaways.
And I know, aside from all the doctors that lived on Pill Hill, there were a lot of Hollywood people, celebrities, and so forth.
Well, actually, not a lot. The only real celebrity that lived close to us, anyway, was Aimee Semple McPherson.
Oh, yeah.
And she lived first across the street, and then down towards Landau way, and she was, then she got a little more money, I guess, and she built the house just to the south of where we lived most of our time. Later on, we moved to 2057 Redcliff Street, and they were in the house at Aimee Semple McPherson lived in that house while I was living at 2023 Redcliff, and there were 2 vacant lots between us. The closest I got to her was we could see her baptizing people in her swimming pool in long white flowing robes and stuff on occasion. And but we never really got to know her.
Never talked to her.
No,
she had a daughter, though, too.
Yes. Oh, I did play with her daughter a little bit, but there was a little bit of standoffish. I mean, I don't know why, but anyway, she was not in the rest of the active circle of kids in the area.
So you never met Aimee much or something?
No.
Never was invited over to have a play group there?
No, never.
Swim in the pool?
No. And of course, I didn't appreciate what a celebrity she was at the time. I did know she had a church and things, but not that she was world famous.
Yeah, exactly. So you grew up and you went to school in Flint Ridge.
Yes.
And then went to Pomona. So you were kind of but you always came back to Silver Lake.
Yes. Yeah, until after medical school. Well, actually, 1 year into medical school, I got married. I married someone that I met in high school. Her name is Cynthia, and she went to West Street School in Pasadena. And at that time, that was a girls' school, and Flint Ridge was a boys' school, and they often had dances and things together. And I met her there. And then she went off back east to Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts, and we met during the summer and such, and then finally got back together and got married after my first year in medical school.
And did your parents stay in Silver Lake all their lives?
Yes.
They did?
Yes.
On Redcliff?
Yes.
In one of the 2 houses on Redcliff?
Well, yeah, 2023.
When did they pass away?
I believe 89 and about the mid-90s from my mother. My father died first.
Okay. And the homes are no longer in your family, right? You sold
No, after my mother died, we sold her house, or the 2023 house.
Okay. So when Silver Lake has changed so much, when you come back today, it
Yes.
it's startling in a way.
Yeah, or you asked me a little bit about what we did.
Yeah.
We played on the vacant lots. It was wartime. We built forts, played war games. Much of that early time, the 4 years of the war, were devoted to making model airplanes and fighter planes and bombers and things, and pretending we were fighting wars and such. Planting victory gardens and things relative also to the war. We often went to Hollywood because it was so easy. We could just hike over the hill and down to Sunset and catch the red car. The red car cost, if you bought enough, $1 worth or something, I don't know, or $10 worth, I'm not sure. You could ride the red car for 7 cents.
7 cents.
7 cents. And we would ride into Hollywood and sometimes go to the movies, sometimes just hang out, sometimes shop like at Christmas time and such. And there was a particularly interesting place for kids. There was a hitching post in Hollywood on Gower, about Gower and Hollywood Boulevard. And it showed old B movies, Red Ryder and Lone Ranger and Roy Rogers and all of the westerns of the time, Tom Mix movies that were made right around here, across the street. And we would often go there. There was a theater in Atwater, and we could catch the red car, which came down Glendale Boulevard and went out that way. And we also went. There's that little theater along Riverside Drive. It's just down here a ways, and often go to those places for Saturday morning matinees. Those were big deals. They had cereal. We caught trapdoor spiders. The lots up there were full of trapdoor spiders, and if you pry open the trapdoor and pour water in, the spider comes out and all those little red babies with him, her, I guess. Or if they didn't come out, then you just let it soak for a while and twisted the thing, and you could lift the cocoon with the trapdoor spider in the bottom. And there were still some rattlesnakes around. My brother was older than I and dumber probably, because he and an older friend used to take. We had a sandbox which outgrew its use, and the bottom had a big piece of metal, and he and his friend got that and took it up to the hill that was was where Aimee Semple McPherson's second house was, right next to where our 2057 house was. And there were a lot of trees and rocks and things, so he put this metal down out in the sun, a piece of metal down with some rocks under the corners, so it was up a little bit. Then we go away for a couple of days, and then we come back, and the kids would climb up in the trees, and my brother and his friend would get sticks, and they'd flip the top of the metal off the rocks, and there'd be a couple of rattlesnakes running around, and then they'd go off into the bushes.
That's like a day job for young kids.
Yes, that's the kind of things we did.
Simple fun.
Yes.
When you would go into Hollywood, did you go? You didn't went by yourself. Your
Well,
parents didn't go, or
no.
you were allowed to?
Once my brother was old enough, and I don't remember how old, but we weren't as worried about things in those days. And I would suppose by the time he was 10 or 12, he would go with us, and then later on we would go by ourselves. But there was no fear. Nobody even talked about it.
What was Hollywood like then when you were a kid? How did you feel about it when you go in?
Well, it was a fascinating place. There were an occasional movie star around. We'd hear about them. Well, we was in there yesterday or shopped here at the I think the Broadway. It was a Broadway there at some time, and we'd hear about them and such. Everybody talked about Hollywood and Vine. Of course, it's not the same anymore. It was a big deal near Hollywood and Vine. This Hollywood sign didn't say Hollywood; it said Hollywoodland. But it was, it had many movie theaters, and they were fancy places like Roman's Chinese and Egyptian and such that were kind of fascinating to kids. But Atwater was very sleepy. There was the two red cars ran down the middle of the street, and that's why there's that big median area there. And so you could go anywhere along there on the red car, and you could go the other way downtown. And we didn't go downtown too much. I'm not exactly sure why. Every now and then, my grandmother would take us. Oh, by the way, my grandmother lived with us some of the time. She would take us downtown, and we would go to. There was a Philharmonic Auditorium down there. We would go to, when we were older, we'd go to music events, and there were musicals and plays and orchestras and such, and wander around downtown a little bit. But that's sort of what we did.
Mm-hmm. So Atwater Village, Hollywood, Silver Lake, kind of your world.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what was the area around Griffith Park and Hyperion like in those days? Because that was really close to your house. So
it was a little bit of a walk to get to Griffith Park. Mm-hmm. But my parents took us to Griffith Park as just to ride the ponies. To there was a merry-go-round there. There was a zoo there. We went to the old planetarium. It was something we did every couple of months. We'd go to Griffith Park, and it was a good place to have a party, picnics for a birthday or something like that. We did that, and I did all the same things with my kids. So hadn't changed a lot.
So when you graduated medical school, when you started working, where were you living then?
First, we lived over in Monon, which is right across from Marshall High School, in an apartment there. Then we moved to Landa in Silver Lake, and then we moved to where we lived for 48 years.
So you were in Silver Lake for a while then after
Yeah.
that. So.
Yeah, I mean, most of my life, except when I was in college. I went to England for a year to do research, and that was it. Silver Lake until recently.
I meant to ask you, what's your specialty in terms of?
I'm also a general surgeon.
You're a general surgeon.
But I worked at the county hospital, and most of what I did was trauma, was people who were shot or run over or fell or whatever. And just because there's a lot of what they do there is emergency surgery.
And now, are you teaching now?
Yes, I don't do surgery anymore, but I teach students and residents. I teach classes. I teach skills labs. I go to conferences and that sort of thing.
Good.
About 3 half-days a week.
Okay, sounds good. About right.
When you're retired, it gives you something to do, but also a little more time. and since they're not paying you anymore, you can leave whenever you want.
That's great. Anybody, any other questions here?
Yeah, what's your exact birth date? I think we didn't get that.
Oh, April 8, 1936.
1936.
At the Good Samaritan Hospital.
A Good Samaritan
Yeah.
Hospital, right? Do you feel like the Depression affected your parents in any way?
Yes.
How was that?
Well, my mother was always very afraid of it happening again. And she kept money hidden in the house because she really didn't trust the banks. Her experience was that her father had a farm in Iowa which was mortgaged and for which there was a call on the mortgage, and because he couldn't pay, they lost his farm. And part of the reason he lost his farm is he had significant savings in the bank. The bank just closed and decided that was it. Bye-bye. And with her money disappeared. Her father's money disappeared. So she was always very worried about that. And she was extremely frugal. Her famous thing she liked to say best was, "A penny saved is a penny earned."
She was still able to go to college, even though her
Yeah, she did. She went to college. The state of Iowa was very good about providing free education at the college level. She didn't have any money and she didn't have to pay, but she had to live. So her father had died in about that time too. He had diabetes, and he died the year that insulin was first available, but he never got any. And so her mother, my grandmother, who came to live with us, went to Iowa City, and she cleaned rooms and houses and things to earn money so they could live while she went to school. And my father's father was did not lose his business or anything, although I mean, one of the things that doesn't change much during a depression is people keep dying. So as an undertaker, his job did not disappear, and he was the only undertaker in town. And so he was able to support my father, but he also died while they were at Iowa City in the flu epidemic. And so there were two grandmothers, but I never knew either of my grandfathers.
I might jump around a little bit because I
Sure.
have a couple of questions. While we're on the subject of medicine, maybe a little bit, it's unusual that the man who hired your father, who was the
Yes.
doctor, who had severe arthritis, couldn't walk and had to go into a wheelchair. And I just wonder if you had an opinion about his type of arthritis that maybe would have been treatable today?
Well, I don't know that we knew that at the time, but I think he developed a rheumatoid arthritis, not the usual wear and tear kind of arthritis.
Or the autoimmune.
Yeah.
He had a severe reaction to it.
Yeah, and it came on fairly quickly. And he was crippled, and it was before any of the things like steroids and such. So there really wasn't much to do about it.
I wondered if you all ever went out to eat at any restaurants in
Oh,
Silver
yes.
Lake?
Yes. Tam O'Shanter was my father's favorite place to go. And we even celebrated things, anniversaries and birthdays and things. But the thing I remember most was the last night before he shipped out to go to war, we ate there. And I was just old enough to really kind of comprehend that this was going to be a bad time. And, but then he got back and we kept going after he got back. And we've gone ever since, even when it was called the Great Scott for a while.
Were there any other restaurants or?
Well,
Did you know
yes, the Brown Derby was up at the end of Hillhurst at Los Feliz. It didn't look like a derby, but it was a chain, part of the Brown Derby group. And particularly after my brother and I got so we could drive, or he could drive, it was interesting. At the time he became 14, you could get a driver's license. You just go down, take the test, and get a driver's license. And you could drive to school and on errands. Of course, errands got stretched. But they changed the law, so I had to wait till I was 16. So there was 4 years when he could drive and I couldn't, which was I never liked. Anyway, but he used to drive. He and I used to drive up there and with some other friends and stuff and get hamburgers because it was a drive-in. Part of it was a drive-in, and you park outside and somebody would come up and take your order and put a tray on the window. And the hamburgers were 25 cents, and the mulled milks were 25 cents, and the French fries were 10 cents. So we could get a pretty good meal for not very much. And
Did you work at all during high school?
yeah, I had 2 jobs during high school. One summer, two paying jobs. One summer, I worked at Hollywood Radio Supply. I was interested in electronics and such. Didn't ultimately go into that field, and I mostly did stocking and inventory and occasionally a little bit of selling, but I was mostly in the back. And it was over near Vermont on Hollywood. It's not there anymore. And then another summer I worked as just a sort of extra pair of hands for a construction company for $1 an hour. And I actually drove a truck. This was after I got to be 16, and I had to go take the special exam, the chauffeur's license, and I drove the truck. I thought that was really going to be great. I was going to be a truck driver. It turns out that you drove the truck for about 10 minutes, and then you spent 4 hours unloading it, and then loading it up again, and then you drove it back again.
The glamour wore off.
But a couple of summers, my mother sent me back to Iowa to work on the farm. I didn't get paid, but I was by that time I was in high school, and I was interested in conditioning, and it was very good for that because you were throwing hay bales up and carrying big bags of feed around and all that sort of thing. And it was also kind of fun. The guy I worked with was my cousin, a cousin. I can't remember what level, but he wasn't my same age, he was older. And he loved to play baseball. They had these baseball leagues in Iowa. So we played softball. we played softball 3 or 4 times a week, all the time I was there, and I just loved that. It was the most satisfying sport that I ever played, because these guys played just for the fun of it. And anyway.
Did you ever go down to the LA River to play with your brother?
Occasionally.
Do you remember?
We used to go, one of the things we used to do is go swimming in the Griffith Park swimming pool. But there were some years, particularly as I got older, old, 10, 11, or 12, where there were big epidemics of poliomyelitis, and my mother wouldn't let us go. But we'd gotten used to going down there to go swimming, and we used to hang out and play catching pollywogs and frogs and other things in the river.
She was worried about contracting.
Well, yeah, she was actually more worried about the contracting in the pool. Mm-hmm. Nobody knew really how it was spread. We used to be dead on, we try and kill every fly in the house to make sure that, because we didn't know that it wasn't spread by flies and all sorts of things. It was really a big part of life, particularly in the summer and as a kid.
And did your brother go? He went to Ivanhoe and then King.
He went to King, and one of the reasons we left the public school system is he was in a big fight at King, and didn't come out too well.
Oh dear.
And so he that was one of the things that prompted the move.
To go to private school.
Go to private school.
He went to Flint Ridge then?
Yeah, he went to Flint Ridge. And
Is he still alive?
no. He passed away about 10 years ago. He went to University of Iowa for his undergraduate.
Did he go into the medical profession too?
No. He ended up being an administrator in the Cal Poly system.
That's mostly it. I just wondered, did you ever, with your friends, go to like a shop or a market to get little things in Silver Lake? You know, like guys wanted to go get comic books or something somewhere.
Yeah, and the Hub Mart was one of the places that we would go to, and just trying to remember the name of the other one that was on the corner of Parkman and Sunset. There was another big market down there we could walk to. And there were some other markets. There were a couple along Sunset too that we would go to, and there were Army surplus stores. Now that was a kid's delight because they had all sorts of weird little things you could buy, and particularly if you were still militarily inclined.
That was in Silver Lake?
Yeah, down along, there was and I think it's still there, honestly. It's at Sunset, across from the dollar store there.
And the other thing was, I don't know if you knew the restaurant L.A. Nicola or the Nicola brothers, because their dad had a market up on Sunset and Fountain. So the kids would come by and get pickles out of the barrel, and he was a contemporary of yours.
Yeah, no, we used to walk out to Sunset and Fountain to catch the red car sometimes.
You get the red
Actually, the quickest way to do it was to go down Redcliff, go over to Mitchell Tarina, down Mitchell Tarina, and catch it by the Mitchell Tarina elementary school right there. But sometimes just for variety, we'd head out over the hill and out Fountain and catch it that way. We sometimes go up and down those stairs. There are a bunch of stairs going down that way.
I have a question actually about, Silver Lake is known really for its diversity now in terms of the types of people who live here and stuff. Well, when you were growing up, did you have any contact with Latin American or Asian
Both.
Both?
Cirillo Salazar, who lived right next. Cirillo Salazar, the kid that I played with, who's my oldest friend, and I still see. His family, Hispanic. I think had been in California for a long time. Mrs. Chung, you know about Mrs. Chung?
No.
She lived across the street from us, and at 2023, she was right across the street. She was an actress, but bit part actress, did a lot of things. The only thing you might have known in the opening of, what's the movie about Sally? Something that's...
When Harry Met Sally?
When Harry Met Sally. You remember there are conversations between, as it opens, there are conversations between couples, but usually one of the couples does all the talking and the other one sort of sits there. Well, she was one of those. She lived there for a long, long time, and any other...
Were there any Japanese Americans that moved in after?
Oh, yeah, well, down the street, down Redcliff, there was where the boys' home is now, New Republic or something like what is it?
Hyperion, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's on Redcliff.
Redcliff?
Yeah, just down from land. That was a place where they put Japanese children during the war for a while. And then I think, I can't remember how long that went on, but those were Japanese people. I guess they were a little bit captive. They walked around and went to school and stuff, but they were stuck there.
Dr. Shigekawa, did you know she?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, did you know her? Yeah. She was an obstetrician here in Silver Lake. She said
I knew of her. I didn't know her.
Pardon?
I knew of her.
Of her, yeah. After the war, her family, the only place her family could buy a home was in Silver Lake.
Yes, there were Asians in my grammar school. Before I moved, my girlfriend was an Asian. Her last name nobody could pronounce, so she was called Donna Samsley. That was the closest we could get to pronouncing her name.
Lance Ito, who was about your age, also went to Ivanhoe. He was the judge in the O.J. Simpson trial.
Oh, yeah, that's
Did
where
you know him at
No,
Ivanhoe?
I only know the name, but recently.
Yeah.
And also, my best male friend was Ruben Martinez, and he lived right over here.
Oh, okay. And his family owned the restaurant here, La Ronda? Was that it?
I honestly don't know what his family did.
Okay, if it's the
But
same.
he lived on the street that runs.
Yes, just back up here. Edgewell.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions, Amy? Good.
It was so interesting.
It's really wonderful, Dr. Berne. Thank you so much for
Okay.
your time. We really appreciate you
You're
coming
welcome.
in today,
And
helping
the
us out.
pictures.
Yeah.
Did you want to look at your notes?
No, I think we covered most everything.
Great. Thank you so much.
Oh, I did want to add one thing. Family connection.
Uh-huh.
My great uncle, James Berne, ran a construction company. One of the construction companies that was hired by Mulholland to dig out and build, and I don't know exactly what part he had, but I remember pictures of him with his mules and steam shovel, which actually ran on steam, down in Silver Lake, cleaning the mud out in, I guess, the 20s sometime, whenever they were
And they drained the reservoir.
dredging out it was a swamp originally. And then also worked on the aqueduct, which comes down from the Owens River project. And so he was the first Berne Silver Lake area. And he lived in Hollywood, and he encouraged my father to come here. So it was not only did he have a job, but he also had relatives living here. So.
Cool. That's good to know. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All righty.